Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for coming out on a rainy afternoon to do good. I'm Linda McKim-Bell, the Vice Chair of the Human Rights Commission, and it's great to see so many members of the public and organizations here today. And the Human Rights Commission meets in several locations around the city to make it easy for you, the public that we serve, to meet us and to share your concerns. The mission statement of the Human Rights Commission is that we work to eliminate discrimination and bigotry, to strengthen intergroup relationships, and foster greater understanding, inclusion, and justice for those who live, work, study, worship, and travel, and play in the city of Portland. And we're guided by the Universal UN Declaration of Human Rights, and we're all volunteers. And we use the strategies of discovery, advocacy, visibility, and education to accomplish our mission. Could our commissioners please introduce themselves? I guess around this way.
I'm Alan Lazo. I'm a Human Rights Commissioner.
Alan worked really hard on putting this meeting together, and we appreciate it.
Mayra Verla, Human Rights Commissioner.
Dave Isaiah Turner, Commissioner.
Amy Samara Kruskop, I'm a Commissioner. Laura Wintergreen, East Portland Action Plan Advocate. Pretty Christopher.
Okay, we're just going to introduce the commissioners, and then we're going to give our organizations a chance to have some brief comments about who they are. So, skipping over Laura until just a few minutes. Our next commissioner is Reverend.
My name is Kate Lohr, and as of today, I was the most recently elected commissioner. So glad to be here.
And now we'd love to hear from anyone who's a public official or community organization to make some, identify themselves and make a brief comment about why they're here.
Well, my name is Renee Du Bois. I'm the interim district manager for the Department of Human Services in Multnomah County. And we are here because housing is a key initiative for our clients, the folks that we serve. And quite a few of our folks are transitioning now to the eastern part of the world.
Are you based in this area then?
Yes, Multnomah County. The district office is over on Ladd Street. So I'm based here as an intern district manager for the Department of Human Services, the state of Oregon. Actually, I'm working between two districts. My other district is out in town at Salem, Marion, Yamhill, and Polk counties. But I'm having fun.
That's the attitude. Oh, now I'm Laura Wintergreen. With the East Portland Action Plan, I am lucky enough to be the advocate with that organization.
We've been having a nice discussion. I'm Frida Christopher. I'm with the East Portland Action Plan. I'm co-chair of housing, which is one of the reasons I'm here. My other hat is I'm with the David Douglas School Board.
I'm Dave Hendry. I'm the captain of East Precinct. Came over with Commander Westbrook, who maybe some of you have met, maybe some of you haven't. She apologized she couldn't make this meeting tonight, but we're very much interested in learning what's happening with East Portland. It's an area of a lot of growth, and we're trying to understand it from a policing model and also from how to better engage the community. So it's a priority for both of us.
I'm Mary Green. I'm with Renee as well. I'm in child welfare DHS here in Multnomah County, and I'm not interim. I live in Multnomah County, and I'm sticking around. I hope Renee is too. She knows that. But similar to what Renee said, I think we're very aware as an agency that the issues out in East County are increasing for us, and we want to have more of a presence. Our closest office is on 122nd and Powell. Child welfare office, substance efficiency office out here as well. So, just wanted, and then the agenda tonight caught our attention. Thanks.
I'm Teresa Casey Soto. I live on Southeast 125th and Powell. And I'm with OPAL, and we're working on the rights of people who ride the bus. And I'm also with EPAP, and I'm also with the Oregon Buddhist Temple. Thank you.
My name's Matt Davis. I work at the Multnomah County Health Department. I'm a policy analyst, and I work on I work with our Healthy Homes program, and then with kind of a team of folks who work on housing and neighborhood livability issues. And the health department recognizes housing as a key determinant of health, and that's why I'm here to kind of just listen to the presentation and what folks have to say. And then I also, outside of work at the health department, am a member of a coalition that Opal leads, advocating for inclusionary zoning, which is a land use tool that promotes affordable housing.
Hi, I'm Joanne Hardesty, and I'm also a member of EPAP. I live in East Portland, and I also represent a community organization called the Urbana Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Peace Reform. And so we're very concerned about current activities that are criminalizing homelessness, and so that's why I'm here.
My name is Elwood, and I work in Human Solutions with residents who live in Rockland.
Oh yeah, I'm on that board too.
I'm Talia Jacobson. I'm a planner with the Major Projects Unit at ODOT here in the Portland office. And I'm here largely for my own education. My training really focused more on transportation issues, and as the impacts of transportation decisions on housing are becoming harder and harder to miss, I felt like I needed to know a bit more. And I'm also here listening for a couple of my colleagues who are working on the Powell Division HCT project and the Outer Powell Safety Project, who couldn't be here today, but told them I'd listen and bring back what I heard.
I'm Mike Tabor, and I'm filming for independent media, and I put a lot of it on joeanybody.com, just a citizen.
Thank you, and we're grateful to you for
Thank
that.
you.
I'm Linda Cargill from the Mid-County Memo newspaper, and I'm just taking notes.
Angela Cause, I too am here with Renee and with Miriam. Congratulations, and it's good to see you again, Pastor. I too work with DHS Child Welfare, and as both Miriam and Renee mentioned, it's a great interest to us as to what's happening with families in this area, particularly with displacement and relocation from north, northeast, other areas of the city. Just really want to hear and learn from the dialogue that happens here tonight and see how that can impact the work that we're doing in servicing families, both through our self-sufficiency programs and child welfare, and where the two overlap.
I'm Diana Nunez. I am with the mayor's office. I'm his new community outreach manager, so I'm on the job 1 month now. But I'm here basically to be a connection between the City Hall and the communities that we serve. So I'm here again to listen, learn, and advocate wherever I can into the mayor's office.
I'm Siobhan Williams with I Have a Dream. We work with Alder Elementary out in the Rockland neighborhood, and mobility is a big issue as well as housing for our families. So just here, like when people listen, gather information, and see how we can use it to help our families.
Thank you.
Wow, what a powerhouse we have here in this community. This is impressive.
You might want to get
Oh, did I miss? I'm sorry.
Oh,
Jim?
hi, I'm Jeff Selby with the Office of Equity and Human Rights.
Sarah, I'm volunteering with the Office of Equity and Human Rights.
Thank you very much for your service. And we have a couple of human rights commissioners that Jester Lamont, can you introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. First, I really apologize. I took the wrong way coming here. I thought I was smart. But I ended up not smart. I apologize about that. My name is Aslan Majidi, and as mentioned, I'm a human rights commissioner, and it's wonderful to see a lot of faces, like a lot of people that here I know, again, Rianne and Angela. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Ashley Horn, I'm a Human Rights Commissioner as well. I also apologize, I had to come from Salem today. I work at the Capitol during legislative session, so it's very busy there. Slowing down finally. And it took me about an hour and a half, so I apologize. I tried to get here on time. And it's really nice to see everyone here today.
Well, to set the setting for our meeting tonight, I thought we'd begin by having some information about East Portland demographics from Alan and Kate Lohr. Laura Wintergreen, pardon me.
Actually from Frida.
And
Actually,
Frida.
we'll open with Frida. So Frida
Thank you
Christopher
very
who,
much. Yes, I've written it down and I didn't read it. It's from Frida Christopher, a longtime community activist.
Do you want me to start?
Please do.
Okay. First of all, I want to welcome you to Ron Russell, one of our newest schools. Though it's a few years old, it's still one of our newest schools. Anyway, but I've served on the Blvd School Board for 23 years. As well as having served on the Gateway Urban Renewal Area Committee for its full existence. In addition, I'm currently co-chairing the Housing for East Portland Action Plan. But I've been a resident out here since 1976. In the last 15 years, especially this area has changed dramatically. And I might often reference Douglas because I know this district inside and out. Because not only have I served on the school board for 23 years, I've been a volunteer in the district since the year I moved here. So I'm considered a bit of a historian of this area. But East Portland geographically comprises an area that presents an equal opportunity to institutionalize the Human Rights Commission commitment to equity. East Portland has 25% of the people in Portland. There's 40% of the school-aged children that live in Portland. It has the highest percentage of the immigrant, refugee, and new Portlander in Portland. And it's the county's only regional center is stipulated in Gateway. So the City Office of Management and Finance budget maps indicate that East Portland revenue per user is only 80% of the city average. For its update of the city comprehensive plan, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability projected that under current policies, East Portland's population will grow by 41,000 households and about 90,000 people over the next 25 years, outpacing all other of the neighborhood districts. This has a huge impact on David Douglas. They're projecting 6,000 new students in the next 20 years. And right now, every single school in David Douglas is at capacity. We have one classroom in elementary available. Just on Monday, talking with the superintendent, they're talking kindergarten next year. If we can't find a way to find more room, 30 cars per class. And it's a lack of space. We have one of the lowest tax base per student in the state, which makes it hard to get bond measures or large bond measures to pass. We did pass one about 2 years ago, and that's a lot of renovation and things going on in the district, but those are mainly to keep up because of lack of funding from the state on our maintenance. But those things affect us. It is critical that funding decisions on social and construction infrastructure be indexed to the growth as well as to the changing demographics, something we have not seen out here. Displacement prevention and intervention tools must be put in place now before it's too late. Our housing subcommittee is right now looking at displacement tools to figure out and analyze each one and which ones have worked in areas, which ones haven't, maybe a combination of ones that might work better if both are implemented and actually used. We plan that in the 2015 legislature, we're planning to have work toward advocating for some of the changes we feel need to be done. We worked toward getting rid of the discrimination to Section 8 in the last legislature. Weren't quite successful with inclusionary zoning, which we advocated for, but we're going to keep working on that one. But we're hoping that we can come with an agenda that we can really push to get our legislators behind. And actually, I had a discussion with Commissioner Shirley Craddock for Metro, is looking at if it's regional wide that some of the issues are, so as a region, can we go after working on some of this? I've just outreached to Gresham, people who are involved in housing, do they want to get interested in working with us on looking at these tools and what to advocate for? But as a committee, we're going to be doing a lot of that. Displacement is right up there as one of our main issues and topics we're working on.
So it's not only addressing the people who have been displaced here, that the schools and everybody is working actively to respect and work with respectfully. We know that that displacement of them from here onto the next round is already in process.
And so that's one of the areas. We really, as a housing group, believe that we need to bring this area of East Portland back to mixed use, mixed income rather. There, as David Douglas, what got me involved is I was seeing our free and reduced lunch rate go from 39%, and we're now at 80% district-wide. We have one school that's 95%. Ron Russell, Earl Boyle, Earl, they're 80. So working with that, to me as a person on the school board, that was my trigger to get involved. I saw tax exempt property going up, because of course you have affordable housing, but besides affordable housing, you have the services coming up out here, nonprofits to service the people, which are tax exempt property. So those were triggers to me to get involved. And when I first advocated, I said, you have to look at this issue, and that's been over 10 years ago. So we actually did a statement, did a heavy study into it, and found out we don't have a disproportionate amount of affordable housing, as Betty says, by design. It's really our, we just have the services out here. We have the hospital out here. We have quite a few things besides the school, a lot of state and county property out here. But it just, that was my trigger to get involved when, with East Portland Action Plan. And then Laura, after my loud work, saying, let's look at this equity, this exemption property. She asked me and Jean DeMaster, who's Executive Director of Human Solutions, would we form a housing subcommittee? Now, you're talking someone who has been very vocal and literally spoken out against Jean's projects. And asking us to work together. And we have quite a little mix of people, very knowledgeable. I don't claim to be the most knowledgeable person on housing. Mine more is education. But we came in one day and figured a goal for that group and what our purpose was, because we really had a lot of common ground. And the idea is that we didn't want concentration in an area, because that's what brings down the livability of an area that's concentrated too much. So we worked really heavily there. We also recently did a study, white paper. We kind of study things and then come out with statements on the inequities of our property taxes out here. And we have a white paper on that showing that there's a serious property tax inequity between East Portland. You can take a house in East Portland worth $200,000, one on Williams, and the person out here pays a lot more property taxes. So we're going to advocate to the legislature to reset the assessed property value on sale, so that doesn't occur. Because it really gives an advantage if you had a choice between buying a house out here and buying one where it's gentrified, you have the amenities, and your taxes are the same and the cost of the house is, the taxes are so much less and the cost of the house is the same. It's kind of a no-brainer. Doesn't matter that you have one of the best school districts in the state out here, it's still a no-brainer from an economic standpoint to buy in an area that values are going up. But Douglas is just recent. The impact with all these demographic changes have been tremendous. We deal with the achievement gap, as everyone talks about, because of the high different ethnic groups, and we're now at 26% ELL students. Those are students that are learning English. we deal with them in all our schools, but even at the high school, they'll have different students. One that may never have picked up a pencil yet, he's supposed to graduate in 2 years, you know? And so sometimes we're having to teach him just some very basic things to even get started. And it all carries a cost to add that extra support that we try to add for our students.
Well, in some of like Centennial School District, 52% Hispanic, Latino, first language Spanish. So working constructively and consciously with communities.
Well, we just found out that we have tipped the opposite side. We have more people of color in bigger districts. And they count the Russians and Europeans, but it's already, the scales have tipped already on that. So it pays to meet with the superintendent on a regular basis, get all the latest facts and stuff. But that's one of the reasons because of these changes, I got involved in these programs. We're a group of 50 to 70 active people who are signed up, committed to helping this area. I don't know if a lot of you have seen all the construction going on, the sidewalks and safety, but a lot of that is due to these Portland in Motion plan, our group on transportation helped develop. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and one of the staff people from Portland Bureau of Transportation commented that they had gotten $47 million in grants for East Portland, mainly because they had a very good plan to work from, and it's been a godsend for them. They've been able to do work out here that we probably wouldn't have gotten done. So as an action plan, we work on various subgroups. The one on civic engagement, that's bringing our minorities in. We have Latinos, Arabic, Russians that sit on that committee, and we have various, we give out grants to minorities. It's supposed to be language specific, culturally specific workshops and that they work on. So if it's for Latinos, it's in Spanish. If it's for Russians, it's in Russian. So that they can learn how to become more involved in the community and how to advocate for themselves in this community. So, and then economic development, we're working on there also, trying to get that going as well, and get our small business and minority business support, because we want them here and we want to help them. We have several other subcommittees that work on similar things, but different, their own issue. I'm also working on education, and our big topic this month is parent involvement and getting the minority parents involved. And this was a selection by the superintendents out here, Park Rose, David Douglas, and Tenniel Reynolds, to that's their biggest issue. They can do the education piece fine, but this is an issue they all share. And so we're going to start working on that with them as a group to try to figure out what's the best way. Earl Boyle's Next Door is one of the most success stories. It is, just finish up, it has a parent group that is led in Spanish. And they have 60 attendees every month meeting, which is huge compared to most schools. So.
Wow, Frida, that was a stunning panorama of what's going on here.
And Linda, people were asking if they could introduce themselves.
Yes, please, yes.
So I apologize for coming late. I had double booked meetings. My name is Betty Dominguez. I'm the Director of Policy and Equity for Home Forward, which is the Housing Authority in Multnomah County. I'm on the Housing Subcommittee, and I just wanted you to know that I was here if you have any particular questions around housing issues in the county. You're probably going to read an article later tonight that we're moving to raise payment standards on Section 8 vouchers in high opportunity, low poverty areas, and then lowering the payment standards in areas that are high poverty, lower opportunity, in an effort to sort of break up some of these concentrations of poverty, give people a chance to access better communities, better neighborhoods. We've done that already to a certain degree in some central Portland neighborhoods. But you will find when I'm working out in Gresham, I can tell you right now, with the primary zip code, only 55 people left Gresham last year with their voucher and went to other places in the county, and only 4 of those people went to areas where we had higher payment standards. So providing that opportunity isn't enough. There also has to be some work around motivation, and we do a lot of work around poverty and things with kids and elders and disabled. So happy to answer any questions that may come up later tonight. Thank you.
I'm Andrea Mathiasen with the Portland Housing Bureau, and so what we do is subsidize and develop affordable rental housing and some homeownership housing as well, and then support homeless prevention services in the city of Portland. And one of the things that we struggle with is that the resources that we would have to contribute to preventing displacement are not in areas necessarily where those are good fits. Our funding sources tend to be seen as causing displacement. So we're just here to listen, figure out how the best ways to program the resources that we have.
Thank you. We're most pleased to have the Housing Bureau here this evening. Thank you for taking the time to come. And we have another commissioner here tonight.
Hi everyone, excuse my tardiness. I'm Emmanuel Price. I'm a Human Rights Commissioner as well. And I'm just glad to be here and get some information to give some.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea and I'm from the Office of City Commissioner Steve Novick. I'm his policy advisor for East Portland.
So the greater part of our meeting time from about 4:40 to 5:45 will be for public comment about housing choices and issues, starting with a short introduction to the Housing Rights Task Force of Human Rights Commission. Then we're going to have a closing conversation about 6 o'clock and a sharing of reflections and create some next steps. And then the commission will have about half an hour to conduct some business. And again, we are grateful to you, the public, for sharing your time with us.
Linda, a quick note on that
Yes.
time. I heard you say we're doing until 6 o'clock. We're going to do, is that right? Until.
No, so we'll start to close the conversation piece probably in about an hour, around 5:40, so that we can start to talk about next steps and closing thoughts. Because we need to get to commission business. We have a little bit to deal with tonight. We need to start that about 6 so that we can be out of the space by 6:30. So I think that's closer to the schedule.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna do not just an introduction to housing, but I'm also gonna back up to the East Portland pieces that Frida talked about so eloquently. In full disclosure, I actually am from East Portland. So I grew up on 172nd between Halsey and Gleason, so not too far from here. And for the folks that came out here, the weather isn't worse out here, it just seems worse. And if you didn't like driving out here, for all the folks that live out here, we have to drive the opposite all the time. So for the folks that it took 45 minutes to get from downtown out here to the meeting, those are the commutes that we face all the time, heading back to the house. So, as I used to tell people, I no longer live in East Portland, or Gresham. I now live in Northeast Portland, but I used to joke with people that Gresham, it's not that far. And then my commute to your home is actually the same as your commute, my commute to your homes. It is a different place, but it is part of Portland. And as Frida said, it's a major part of Portland. There are a couple of things that brought us, the Human Rights Commission, out here. One of them is, I'll talk about in a second, is the work that we started in around housing. But also I think there's a strong movement around East Portland right now. East Portland Action Plan. There's been a lot of news about East Portland parks. There was a big series in the Oregonian, a continuing series around the issues here in East Portland. And one of the reasons we landed where we did here in the David Douglas District are the pieces that Frida talked about. I looked up some of the same statistics, and as Frida mentioned, the district overall has students that are in the free and reduced lunch program at 80%. That number in the Portland Public Schools, just for reference, district-wide is below 45%. And that number has changed here in David Douglas. From 2002, that number was 55%. So that's a time period where, as Frida said, there have been significant changes in this area. And we are in the center of the area, this Powell versus Gilbert neighborhood that's mentioned specifically in the Oregonian series as sort of being dangerously dense. And as Frida said, more density coming to this area. So that's the context for what brings us out here. And for me, we use the word housing, but it's not about where people live and the buildings they live in. As we talked about in our concept for this meeting, housing really means access to opportunities. And as we see folks that are being displaced from other areas of the city, that choice really becomes the key word to me. That there are people that don't have choices about housing, and that's part of what brought the Human Rights Commission into our work around housing. It was also the Oregonian series about 2 years ago that really pointed out the disparity in where Section 8 vouchers were landing, the high disparity that were landing east of 82nd, and that people did not have, that people who were using Section 8 vouchers did not seem to have a choice about where they could live. And you talked about the fact that there's a vacuum about the way that works. Okay, it's continuing to pull folks out here, and there are measures being taken by a lot of folks in this room to help reverse that vacuum. But that's kind of what gets us.
I was just, if I could add, Frida earlier had mentioned affordable by accident.
Yeah.
So for 14 years in the county, I've been saying there's a big difference between affordable by accident and affordable by design. So poor housing stock, privately owned, will draw people with vouchers because they can afford that better. They can get 2 bedrooms maybe in a higher poverty area than they can, a 1-bedroom in Portland. So I just want to make the distinction. It's not, the housing choice voucher is just that. A tenant is income qualified, they get a voucher, and they can choose anywhere that they want to live in the county, and they will usually go where they can get more bang for their buck. So housing stock is a big part of the equation.
And that comes into play for me too, because actually when I lived in Gresham, I was on the Gresham Planning Commission for 2 years, and even at that time, it's been 12 or 14 years, it was discussions about housing stock and how disproportionate a share East Portland and Gresham was taking for dense, affordable housing. So this isn't a new problem, but it is a buildup of creating that vacuum out here that has drawn us to this place of where we're moving. So that's the context I wanted to give for how we as a group got into housing. We also, like the other groups in the room, advocated for the protected class for Section 8 voucher holders, which we are so delighted went through legislature last year, and then also continue to advocate for inclusionary zoning as giving cities the opportunity to provide or to acquire inclusionary zoning in their planning measures. So we'll continue along that advocacy route, and then also take what we hear here. Our intention is to, I find, even though I'm from out here in East Portland, that many of the pieces from downtown, from City Hall, from the Portland building, from the commissions, tend to be very central city and southwest centric. So part of my intention with bringing us out here is for us as a group, the commission, to hear some of these statistics, share with the service providers that are here, and take back an understanding as we advocate in the different areas that we do as a commission, including housing, including working with the police bureau, and lots of different places. So that's what brought us out here, and we hope that we bring some of that back with us, along with the folks that are out here from them.
When do we have, as a commissioner, when do we have the time to ask questions or comments?
So I think the agenda, as Alan and Myra planned it, was that we would move pretty much at 4:40, about 10 minutes ago, into a full room conversation. In the context that Alan provided, and I think in the mix of all of that, commissioners can give comments and as well as everybody else at the same time. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No comments? Okay.
Behind you.
Amy, do you want to just go
Yeah.
over at this?
Let me just kind of frame this. I was asked to help shape this conversation because there's a lot lot of issues, a lot of things running all at the same time. And so I just kind of prepared some starting questions. What I'm hearing is that at the end of our exploration, we really want to look at this. How does what's going on in Portland as well as in East Portland, how might that impact the work of HRC as well as city offices? I'm so glad that there's representatives from city offices here. And so these are the three questions that I was hearing that would get us to that. What do you feel should be done to support people displaced in Portland? How do you feel, what do you feel could be done to prevent displacement in Portland? And what are your experiences with displacement in Portland? So that's my suggestion, that those questions kind of guide our comments. If you have something to say that doesn't exactly fit into that question set, that's good too. And let's put this one aside at first and just address the first three is my suggestion. And from there, I would just suggest that any of those three questions can be addressed at any time. Yeah.
Just a quick question, or since we have a lot of different professional areas in the room in terms of stakeholders, the term inclusionary zoning, I don't necessarily want to assume that everyone knows what that is. So can someone define that? Hopefully they'll define that. So since that is a key central part of all this questions, anyone want to?
Jean?
Sure, I'm Jean Master, I'm the co-chair with Frida of the East Portland Action Plan Housing Subcommittee. And I think that displacement is, inclusionary zoning is, when a city government gives some kind of assistance to a developer of a housing unit, either more floor area ratio or waiving a permit or not having a system development charge, they get something. And in return for getting that, they agree to include a certain number of housing units for very low-income people in the building that they're developing. So let's assume that somebody's building a 30-unit apartment building and they waive $50,000 of system development charges in exchange for saying 10% of that building, so 3 units, would have to be reserved for low-income people and the rent put at an affordable level for low-income people.
And that would just say East Portland Action Plan did not see inclusionary zoning as a displacement prevention tool for East Portland. It is not a displacement tool, but they recognize the regional opportunity for people of low incomes, and so they supported that concept.
Sorry, real quick, 1 second before we get a little bit further. In terms of note-taking for this, I'm suggesting that at the end we take notes about next steps, but what's our process for making notes from people's suggestions and thoughts before that?
Sarah is thinking. So
Okay.
we have a note taken for the meeting. Right?
You want me to do
Yeah.
that? Okay.
So yeah, specifically the ideas and good content that's coming. Sorry.
Our discussion on inclusionary zoning was the thought that to give people choice. And that's right now they don't have choice. But if a city required it, if Oswego required it, people would have a choice whether they come in that school district or not. Right now, their choices pretty much are David Douglas, Park Rose, Centennial, Reynolds, Gresham.
And it's an odd thing for East Portland because we have so much low-income housing, you wouldn't have a developer in East Portland put more low-income housing. It would apply to developers in other wealthier parts of the city. In East Portland, you wouldn't have it because we already have so much low-income housing.
And Jean, I just want to reinforce the distinction between the low-income housing that the market produces versus the affordable or low-income housing that you do, or I do, or Catholic Charities does. So when you say a density of affordable housing, when it's truly affordable and it's got restrictions on it and it's got funding from the state, which you know very well, it's always going to be affordable, it's always going to have management, it's always going to have services, it's not going to fall into disrepair. And people confuse all the time sloppy market rate housing that is affordable as affordable housing, but it's not, in the true sense of the word affordable. It's not regulated and the rents aren't restricted, it's affordable by accident.
And that's what we've stressed is there is a perception, or has been voiced a perception, that East Portland does not need any more affordable housing. And we stress that we're pretty equitable with affordable by design housing, affordable housing that provides people with a quality of life. And we need as much as anybody else of that out here, because if we don't have that developed out here now, we will have that displacement of families.
Okay. Just to wrap up inclusionary zoning, the issue with inclusionary zoning is that there's actually a ban, and I'm not, some of you might know the year that it was put in place. So cities are actually prohibited from requiring developers to include that type of regulated affordable housing in their planning. So by the push is to ask the legislature to lift the ban to allow cities to require developers to make that as part of their plan. So that's, there's a background in inclusionary zoning, but the push is to lift the statewide ban that prevents the city, Portland for instance, from requiring developers to do that.
Great, so I want to just check in regarding affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, and give others a chance to weigh in on that first topic that was brought up before we move on. Any other thoughts, experiences with it? Is this a good time for you to touch base on what you wanted to add?
Yeah, I will just say, because it was a presentation by Frida, thank you so much for that, and I just want to comment about some part of things that was there. And it has, for me, it is hard to see that we are trying to look at a problem to solve it, of how people, why they move to certain areas, and not looking at the heart of the roots why people move to certain areas. And it is, for me, it is a design of the city, or certain portion in that way. Because I find it's very astounding to me when I moved here to US and to Portland, Oregon, why certain schools get a lot of funding and good teachers versus other schools. Why certain schools get certain high number of students that should be in them and other schools don't. Why certain roads and neighborhoods have good signage of stop signs and lighting and others don't. This is what creates places to be cheaper than others. This is what creates some things that's very disappointing to people that move from one area to another. And they get a lot of input that from immigrants and others that they have concerns about why I can't have my son or my kids have the same opportunity of parks and quality of parks and teachers and other places as if Southwest or other places. Even though, and I appreciate you mentioned that comment because it has been a struggle a lot of times, of why do we pay high taxes here versus a house, a smaller house, versus a mansion in Northwest. That's has been an issue of the housing and equity as well. So for me it is looking deeply with our, hopefully, people who represent us in the City Hall, to start looking at what can we do to develop those areas, spending a lot of money in those areas to develop parks and other quality things for these kids and this. Because when we have our law enforcement and thinking we need more law enforcement and why they are not doing their job in East County, we don't surprise, we should be surprised. They can't do the job or be having enough staffing in law enforcement because we come to a complex. We tend to say people choose to go there because that's what we can afford. And we come to an area, we build a complex and we mixed groups of people. To Chicano, to African American, to other cultures. And warnings comes when you mix like that. Sometimes things we don't hope for happens. Why, again, the city doesn't work instead of coming in the building somewhere that says, okay, we'll give them 5 houses or housing of low income like happened in New Columbia or other places. Why we don't have people, affordable places, or the city does something about that, where we have people that can reside in areas where there is wealthy, happy neighborhoods. So people and the kids grow in that environment and improve their lives as well. So this is what I will put back on the city. It is your responsibility to look at this area. It is the issue that you created or the plan you created. I'm not talking about regimes who are now in the city, but was created through like the history and restriction and etc. So thank you.
So other experiences around displacement, other themes that you guys in your work are seeing or coming up? cause of displacement we're seeing, that is the effect of the displacement we're seeing in inequity.
Well, I would tell a story. I worked doing community involvement in Northeast when they were bringing in the interstate maps. And I was telling someone earlier today, I would go door to door saying, is this what you want? Or is it the metal arm of gentrification to go through your neighborhood? And they were looking at forming a urban renewal area and saying to people, this is your chance to determine that. The history for African American community members with model cities has not been positive. Model cities, which was the precursor to urban renewal area, drove African American families out. And there was a gentleman living across the street from a middle school in North Portland, was African American, he owned his home, he had his family. And he said, and I said, so historically this hasn't been a particularly good thing for the African American community. And he said to me, oh, historically it's quite accurate. We live where you let us live. And so indeed there was great displacement that happened into East Portland. And indeed he told me, this was 15, 17 years ago, he was moving to East Portland at that time already because he could get a larger home for his family. My concern is that we now not do the same thing again, and by not preventing displacement and putting tools and housing and access into place now, we will again be telling families, and now you leave this community. And so that's sort of my history with this issue.
As there has been a shift, demographic shift, income shift to East Portland, this is just a general question for anyone who can answer this. Are middle income residents generally staying or are they leaving?
I'll give you some examples from Douglas, just because that's where my major comments is knowing it, is what we're finding. Douglas is a strong school district, and it has been for years. It gets its accolades. We've got, 2 principals of the year this year besides the superintendent of the year. But what I've seen occurring over the years is we still have a core of people like myself who have been involved over the years who stay here. This is our community. But we have quite a few that come in when the kids hit kindergarten and move when the kids leave the high school. They want them here because we still provide arts and all these things. But I see more of the parents of students when my kids went to school have since moved on and farther east or wherever, because they see this shift. Some of them aren't comfortable with it, and they're just moving on. But they stay for the schooling, the middle income, but then they're gone. But our middle income areas have shrunk dramatically. There's just pockets of them. When my kids started school, Lincoln Park was the poverty school, so we had extra resources. Now every school in David is a poverty school.
So just let me kind of comment. I'm sitting here thinking as I used to live out here in the eastern part of the world in Gresham quite a few years ago, and I saw some of the transformation that was taking place back then. Always concerning all of these multiplex apartments versus making a diversity of apartments and apartments that you're going to into it. But I also grew up in Northeast Portland and across from Dawson Park. So I saw all of that change as a youth and what took place there. But even as you have the conversation around housing, I just really encourage folks that the other critical issue, because I think some of the main issues to me that I see is not people are uncomfortable with folks, it's that people aren't working. And if you cannot connect employment with this, I mean, I grew up, even though I grew up in Northeast Portland, it was diversity over there. But people were working. They had businesses and all the other kind of things that were happening up between Vancouver, Williams Avenue, all of that. Alberta, people went to work. You had the railroad, you had the shipyard, you had all of that. So as you have this conversation, you really have to keep what's happening with employment. Because when you mix people and put them in an apartment, a group of folks, regardless of what color, but if they have a sense of hopelessness, you're going to receive what we're getting now.
And I think with East Portland Action Plan, because we do have an economic development subcommittee, as well as the civic engagement, which is looking at our people of color and issues related around that with housing, we're looking together at displacement because we know it takes employment. We want to raise the economic level of the people, keep them here, but raise their economic level. Whether through workforce training, the district itself is looking at how can we help the nonprofits utilize our buildings to increase workforce development and stuff and everything. So we're, as a school district, looking and saying with our growth out here, how can we help raise those people, not put them out somewhere else, but actually help them raise, bring in some more middle-class families so we have a nice mix.
Do we have any statistics on the unemployment rate?
We
have them, we didn't bring them.
I brought I can look at it. We have an economic development assessment here, and people have obviously been taking this, but we welcome if you want to sign up and say you'd like a copy, and I'll look it up in there. What I'd say is there is a breakdown, I was showing Linda, of the people who leave East Portland to go to jobs outside of East Portland, and then there are the number of people who come into East Portland for jobs. When we did this assessment, we also did a workforce assessment. We worked with a person who's now with the Coalition for a Livable Future, who looked at it and said, what are the skill sets of the people who live here now? Because if we create jobs, and this isn't to criticize anything, but so you put in an Adventist healthcare system, and you get a lot of jobs in East Portland. The majority of those people are getting off the highway. They don't shop here, they don't live here, and they get on the highway and they leave. Those aren't jobs for the people living here, unless you do one of the projects Frida's long been involved with, Jean has been involved with, is the Education Economic Development Center that they're hoping to have at Gateway to work with the K-12 schools and Mount Hood or PCC to build people's capacity to get those healthcare jobs, because the healthcare industry is your #1 industry nationally, but certainly in East Portland as well. But also to say what jobs for the skill levels that we have people. Many of the new Portlander immigrant refugee community members in East Portland don't have the skills that fit in that little box you check. But they have skills. What are those skills, and how do we bring jobs to this area that whereby they can contribute to their community, feel good about themselves, and live in a mixed community, feeling proud and as members of that community. And so we did some of those studies, and one of the issues they're looking at planning and sustainability is talking about taking the Gateway area, which for those of you not familiar, it's where you have an intersection of light rail and such. We're talking about the Halsey-Gleason 90th, 102nd area. When you look at that, you have transit that can get people to jobs. What if there was a reclassification and you had some sort of low industry jobs that are entry-level manufacturing jobs, and you rezone that? But simultaneously, again, don't bring in these people who are now leaving the waterfront, Southeast waterfront, because it's the cool and groovy place to live, and they're looking for where can we put those industries. Certainly look at East Portland, but train people to get those jobs. Because the reality is, and this isn't to target a population, but when you've lived in a refugee camp for 19 years, you don't know about getting up and preparing and getting to work on time and making sure you have a backup plan for childcare. You have to learn those skills, and that's what the Gateway Economic Education Center will do, is helping people to be ready for those jobs, and to see that that's coupled with creating an environment that provides an environment that people can have family wage jobs to stay here as it gentrifies. Manifest destiny is Portland is going to move out this way. There's really not another direction to go. So how do we do exactly what was said? Prepare people to have living wage jobs to be able to stay. wake up.
So we've been saying for a long time, a healthy community needs a jobs, housing, transportation balance. People need to live near work. It's good for the employee, it's good for the employer, it's good for the local economy. So working along those lines, all throughout the county for us, but certainly with EPAP and East Portland has been big. We have a $5 million grant with Work Systems Inc. that we've been working on, a program called Housing Works, and getting people to work and getting them in certain fields and work source and training with them. They work with Gene as well at Human Solutions. And so I just want to say, I didn't say earlier in terms of scale, we own and operate 6,600 units of affordable housing in the county, and we administer another 8,900 Section 8 vouchers. So we have over 15,000 households in our care in some way. Largest developer of affordable housing in the state. So these issues are huge to us. We were actually created in 1941 to house the Vanport shipworkers. So we've seen all these iterations, and ma'am, you are exactly right. I mean, poverty is about jobs.
Okay, so yeah, it seems like there might be some more, thank you, some more comments about poverty, jobs, and I also heard was very strongly hopelessness, that corresponds with that, yeah.
Yeah, one thing is, Renee, that's a good point, that's talking about jobs. You have a good program, jobs program, a very successful program, this is because of jobs. But one thing that I will encourage the mayor and also the city officials to look at is enterprise zone money. Here is why, and I don't know if some of you know enterprise. Briefly, the city waives certain taxes and things for certain employers and businesses in the city of Portland, some of them to $5 million for 4 years, 5 years, in exchange to expand or to improve, that they can hire from local employees and low-income employees in exchange, but they have to grow jobs. And I see that, I don't hear or see employers that receiving that money, they're acting on that. That is another way of losing people and going to displacement, going somewhere else. One of them, I think in early 2001 to about 2005, was very successful in Northeast, when we had Northeast One stop there and stuff like that. That we used to work with certain companies. You receive this, 1 million, you're going to have 20 jobs recruited through government, local one stop, for people from this neighborhood. Southeast, FedEx, for example, others, who are going to help you with this tax money, create state-approved project enterprise zone. How many are you going to hire for that area there? And also, what money you are going to give law enforcement, going to give to parks, going to give to housing as grants, and because there were two committees developed, business and community development through grants to help with people and things like that. This is another way. It is lost, I don't know where, but I would really appreciate if the current mayor and the city council to look at that, what's happening with that e-zone money.
Can I add on to that? I'm a chief administrative officer of a consulting firm, and I actually have an office down in California in an enterprise zone. And what I see often when I listen to the enterprise zone here when they expanded it, they focus on very large businesses. We don't have the property for large businesses, but they don't. The smaller business needs someone that's a little more savvy to help them navigate through getting those grants and to encourage them to move out here. But what can you do? I know enough working on volunteer stuff that I've been able to get a lot of credits for my company down in California because I knew enough on where to go look. But the average small business doesn't. And we lose some of the good, where we can have some professional service, get a mix of services, so some of those people aren't driving out for jobs, they stay here for jobs and stuff. So the city's got to work on that a little differently, at least from my perspective.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say, let's hear from you next, and then perhaps other folks can comment on specifically the enterprise solution, their observations or suggestions for that.
I just want to point out that there is a very large population here in Portland who is transit dependent. They do not have cars, and I represent that population. So back in April last year, Neil McFarland met with Opal people, and one of the things he said was that he had met with businessmen from the Tigard area who said, we have lots of jobs, we have lots of jobs. except the people cannot get to them. So I
Can you
think,
specify who Neil McFarland is for everyone?
yeah, I'm so sorry, Neil McFarland is the person who's heading TriMet right now, the general manager. So, I think that we have been very vocal, Opal has, in pointing out to the powers that be, like the mayor, that this area of transportation, bus, and I emphasize the bus because as you know, those of you who have lived here, there is no problem with building maxes. Federal funding comes in for maxes, and then the company TriMet matches the federal funding. So there's no problem with maxes. It's the bus service that has been decimated in the last 13 or 14 years. And even though TriMet is saying we are replacing some of that service, I feel that the city really needs to keep its eye on what is happening to the services provided to people who ride the bus. And I just want to say one last thing. Since I think it was 2012, unless I'm wrong, the bus pass for people who are under 65, over 18, is now $100 per month. And so what I have said to TriMet is stop balancing your budget on the backs of poor people. That is not affordable for people who are making minimum wage. That is horrible. And so I just want to be relieved. I really want to emphasize that.
Heard that from New Portlanders who said they put housing on the light rail, but we don't have a discretionary dollar to pay for a ticket to get on that light rail. We simply do not have that dollar. And what we've said is, why aren't we using our Oregon Trail cards as bus passes? You know, it's assessed, we know the person is eligible, why wouldn't we just use that as a bus pass for those families? The other thing is Arlene Kimura, who is co-chair of the EPAP, who is transit dependent and a pedestrian, always brings up the fact it's not even just getting to Tigard, you can't get a bus to Columbia Boulevard and to the industry there. It doesn't go that far. It doesn't get you there.
Well,
she used to get up to go on Columbia. She would get up at 3 a.m. in the morning. She just recently retired to work at Kraft, to be able to get to Kraft because the amount of she had to walk to get there on time and then catch a bus.
In a nutshell, the service that has been cut has totaled something like 140,000 hours in the last 11 years. So that's a lot of service that has been cut. There are a lot of ways that this issue can be addressed. It's just that you're dealing with the board of directors for TriMet and you're dealing with a certain culture. So I just want to advocate for people who are riding the bus. So thank you.
Could you say a little bit more about the culture? I want to make sure I understand.
What I'm saying is I'm talking about a culture at TriMet. Because I started with Opal in 2010, and the only time that I didn't go before the TriMet board was when I was working, I couldn't be there. And so what we found is that the mindset is not oriented toward customer service. Okay, and so my push has been to the board that I will be here as much as I can, reminding you that you can be the best that you can be. And that means taking into account what all these people who come before you and tell you needs to be fixed. You need to take that into account. You need to listen to your customers. And that's what I mean by the culture in TriMet, is that it needs to be adjusted so that customers are taken into account. The people who are riding the bus specifically need to be taken into account. When they tell you there is no shelter besides the one on 122nd and Powell, thank you, Opal, going toward Gresham, there is no more shelters. There are no shelters. So all those people who are waiting for the bus along Powell when it's raining.
And there's no sidewalks. There's
Right.
no sidewalks and
But
no
the
sidewalks.
sidewalks, I'm on that committee too. So, you gotta listen. And not too long ago, Opal filed a complaint with the Federal Transportation Administration. And the basis for that complaint is that the TriMet board did not listen when the associate director from Opal said to them, you have effectively cut the transfer time of people who ride on the weekend because you cut the service on the weekend. You have cut their transfer time 1 whole hour. You have not done an equity analysis. And these people have really been impacted by the fact you put in a machine and you pay your $250 because we're concerned with the people who pay the $250, the single fare. And then you don't really get 2 hours of transfer time because you have so little service on the weekend. So Opal has recently done that, and we're mobilizing around that. But the point is, once again, that we, the people who ride the bus, pay our fare. We are not asking for a free ride, and we deserve to be taken care of. Thank you.
Usually when we talk about displacement, we mean that somebody was living someplace and they got pushed out of that place into a different area. But I work at Human Solutions, and there's a list of about 200 families who are homeless. And they did, for the large part, live in East Portland or in East Multnomah
Ron
County.
Russell, Sons Juice, this is the last call for the activity bus. Last call for the activity bus. Thank you.
You're in a school. So these are families that we're living, a lot of them in East Portland and East Multnomah County. They became homeless. We would provide them housing vouchers, so we would pay for the rent for another 3 or 5 or 7 months, but they can't find a landlord who will rent to them. There's no vacancies in the apartment stock in East Portland and in East Multnomah County. So, I mean, displacement sort of takes another form now of, instead of being pushed out of where you intend to live into some other area, many families are now pushed into homelessness and remain homeless for much longer periods of time, living in shelters or living doubled up with other people because they can't find a landlord who will rent to them because there's no vacancies. And so part of this displacement issue has to be what happens to homeless families, but the other part of it has to be we have to have more housing that is intended for low-income people so we don't get more and more people backing up into the shelter system for homeless families. So that's part of displacement that we never thought about before.
Jean, that's a very good point, and HUD just released a report that showed that the Portland metro area has the second highest, or lowest, how do you want to say, the vacancy rate here is 3%, one of the lowest rates in the entire country, and the only area lower, no, we were at 3.1, the only area lower was at 3 in Santa Clara County in California. So market vacancies and markets, drive what people can do and where they can go.
And it may be 3% overall in Portland or Multnomah County, but the percentage of vacancies in apartments that a low-income family could afford is like 1% or a 0.5%, or in many cases, landlords will say, I have hundreds of units and I have no vacancies. And so that's part of the displacement that I think we have to address as well.
And it has the impact on the children, because it's one of the things we're looking at in the schools is how can you stabilize them in the homes? Because in order to educate them and give them the chance to go on to college or get a good job, is they can't be moving every few months. Because the district here in David Douglas, they align their curriculum on all the elementary schools. Because we don't want kids, there's like a 6 weeks block that the teachers may change, but we had so much mobility that we were finding if we didn't do that, kids lost too much. I can remember tutoring a child who grew so much, and in 5th grade, it was only because the one-on-one tutoring, I discovered he never learned how to subtract, didn't even know what the concept was, and they were teaching him fractions or trying to, but that's what happens with mobility. They lose, and even if they move on and they're in good schools and stuff, they have gaps that they have to catch up on. And so the housing, to stabilize their housing is a key factor, even as a school district we're looking at it.
I have one more question. Is it the rising rental costs? Is it stagnant wages? Is it unemployment? What are the forces driving this displacement?
More people living in poverty, more people with lower incomes have meant that the apartments available for low-income people have filled up. So the supply stayed the same, but the demand got greater because people that used to have middle-income jobs lost them and took the jobs that low-income people used to have. The low-income people were then unemployed, and the housing stock filled up with the there used to be middle-income people, and there just isn't enough housing stock for everybody.
And they've lost, they may have owned homes and
Right,
lost their
right.
homes.
In many
and
cases, they did own
suddenly
homes, and they've left the home ownership and they're in rental.
Or they're foreclosed. We found in the northeast side of East Portland, so
not Northeast Portland, but the northeast side of East Portland, which had been sort of, Frida talked about the enclaves where you had more middle income housing. What we're hearing from the neighborhood associations with that is the housing is deteriorating because people have, with the basic recession, depression, haven't been able to keep it up, and it's also been foreclosed. And those houses are now being left vacant, but the banks are not moving them into ownership, and so that then becomes a policing problem. And they're also being squatters, but not, those squatters aren't getting their children into school. They're, so they're then children are being unschooled and just surviving and finding a place to live. But those houses that had been middle income houses, because of the economics, are now vacant and not being used in East Portland.
Quick question about that. Does that affect the squatters, the empty houses, any law enforcement issues?
Yeah, it's actually a very timely comment, because that's something that we're looking at East Precinct specifically, because we do have a lot of homes now that have been foreclosed on. And some people are still living there, just not paying for it anymore, and they're trying to do what they can. And so that doesn't quite meet the definition of a squatter, but we do have a lot of abandoned property, what we call distressed properties, where people are living and not living because there's no running water, and so I'll let your imagination run wild on that. And then we don't really know about it because people go on with their lives, and suddenly they're like, hey, there's a lot of people coming in and going, and then we find out, yes, indeed, this house has been taken over. And the property owners are not, the banks typically are not taking care of it in an appropriate manner, obviously, with that. And so it becomes a policing matter, because now we're trying to deal with the situation for the neighborhoods, and we're seeing all sorts of other associated crime that goes with that. And a lot of the folks that are coming in, in my experience has been not necessarily folks that are homeless as you're talking about, it's folks that have been more involved in some other issues. And it is a big problem out here, and I would imagine if we really took a census of how many properties we have in the East Portland area that are abandoned or in a state of disrepair with basically spot checks. So 1 week maybe playing with them, the next week when I have somebody else in there, it'll be very high. And so Commander Westbrook is working on a strategy with our neighborhood response team and also neighborhood involvement to try to figure out how do we manage that, because that is a whole other piece of the housing segment that we haven't really talked about.
And how do you get those homeless people perhaps into those houses legitimately, where there is space that can provide some secure housing?
Right, and so can we just take a minute and just clarify the squatter and the criminal behavior piece? So are you saying that homeless will squat in foreclosed homes, and then because that home has been established by homeless as a landing pad, criminal activity will enter?
I think, there's it's a complex issue, but I think you do see some of that. It depends on, if for folks that, I will say this, for folks that are homeless that do not have a chemical dependency issue, it is a different matter than folks who are suffering from chemical dependence. Just because that does sometimes become a crash pad for other folks that are suffering from those dependencies. And then the property really starts degrading, and then starts bringing more folks in, because there is that connection between property crimes and drug use. And you're starting to see concentric rings starting to circulate out. It's just a very difficult issue to deal with.
I think it also depends on the neighbors. They have one of those squatters down the street, we're a dead end street. And at first we thought, oh, we bought the house. And the neighbor across the way started checking things out. And so we're a more active, involved neighborhood. Many of us have lived there many years. So it wasn't long before we were calling the police, and out they went. And then 2 weeks later, someone else moved in. And finally it got sold, so it actually, the person buying it moved in. But if you don't have an active neighborhood of involved people who are willing to be vocal about it, I can see where the problem would really escalate.
Very briefly, one of the issues is, so if I contacted my officers, contact a person who's squatting in a property, I can say you're here illegally, and then you trespass from that property, and then they leave, potentially. And then they go find another property, and then they're like, well, I'm in a new property, and like, okay, well, you can't make that property either. So, you trespass on that property, and they move to another property. And what they're looking at, the strategies is the potential strategy of saying, hey, if you've been trespassed from an abandoned property, you
you've been trespassed from all abandoned properties, you now know, and so now it's arrestable. You know, to try to get folks to fall in line with, you know, not breaking into homes that don't belong to them. It's not a great solution, we're trying to find other alternatives, but for the folks that are chronic, and I'm typically talking about the folks who have been, when there are criminal complaints related to their living status, that is something we're looking at as a strategy.
So I just, truly do understand that as we continue to look at the social purpose of developing sustainable and healthy neighborhoods, I think as you look at this in the future, part of it is the conversation with the corporate world, banking. I mean, these folks who own these buildings, they need to be part of the conversation. And we would probably be surprised if they probably have some resources to help communities. The other is that we tend to forget, because of this economic downturn, some of the folks, the same homeowners, now they have all of this blight on their credit, so they can't get something. So that's a whole other different conversation that we really never have with anyone, whether it's the city, county, or the state. And how do you begin to address that? I probably come from this where medical, food, and housing should be a basic right of everyone. And they should not be outpriced by it. They should be able to live wherever they can afford, and if they can't, there should be some options for them. And when you begin to think like that and really begin to advocate, you get the right folks in the room, hopefully we can make some changes. But you have to look at how the dots connect. Because if you have bad credit history, even in Section 8 housing, I think the federal government came out with, you know, I think one on food benefits, that if you committed a felony, then you couldn't get food benefits. I mean, what is that? If you went to jail and paid your time, why shouldn't you be able to eat? You know, just think about that. And that if you tell a person that they can't eat, then what do you think they're going to do? You know, there is a consequence for every time we make an action that we think we're saving the world. And I think we need to be cautious and begin to look at how the dots are really connected. As for Portland, again, we're not going to stop when it's taking place over there. So what we have to do now is figure out how can we build and continue to sustain the communities that where folks are moving.
Thank you. 1 second. I want to catch up with our introductions. I think maybe one person in the back came in, and this gentleman taking pictures. We'd love to introduce yourself. Could we get your name?
Hi, I'm Amy Drew from Dan Saltzman's office.
Say it one more time.
Amy Drew from Dan Saltzman's office.
Dan Saltzman's office. Great. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I was Linda with the county.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the crappy local paper.
Okay. Yeah, you're right about it. Right. And Malloy.
I actually had a question.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Malloy Good. I'm with the Human Rights Commission. I apologize for being late, especially since this is kind of my area. I actually had a question for you, sir. My question really is, have you been able to talk to, or have you heard from other officers who are in other areas of Portland, primarily inner northeast, inner southeast, southwest, northwest, describing their experience with vacant foreclosed properties, and are they experiencing the same kinds of issues, or are they not?
Yeah, I think it's a citywide issue. I mean, it's just the housing market and job market has impacted us across the city at all levels. And so I think there's a lot of communication between the three precincts that we have, which is Central, North, and East Precinct. And there are commonalities that we do see. Every precinct has its, as far as crime, has its, you know, hot pockets of areas and things like that. But as far as the issue of the distressed homes and the squatting issue, it is seen throughout. It seems to be, now granted I'm over here at East Precinct, so it seems we hear more about it more in this, in the East County area. And I'd be interested to find out how many homes have been foreclosed, you know, or in that state, you know, by district basically. But it's everyone has it, it's just at what level. It's just like the homelessness issue that Central Precinct may have. You know, we've seen an increase in homelessness in East County, specifically along the trails. precincts there too, so, the issues are not unique to any one precinct, but the impacts may take more time, for the officer's time for each precinct.
And by the trails, you mean?
Springwater
Yeah.
Trail,
I ask because, the National for Housing Alliance, which is a nonprofit civil rights housing group, with local groups, did a multi-city study, not here in Portland, but in other places, about real estate owned properties, and what they found is that, these distressed homes in foreclosure, owned by the banks, that are in well-to-do neighborhoods, or better, higher income neighborhoods, and thus a larger percentage white population neighborhoods, were very well kept and did not suffer from the deterioration issues that homes owned by the same bank in a lower income, high minority area suffered from. And so that's one of the things, ever since that came out, I've had that in the back of my mind and wondered how banks in Portland, Multnomah County are treating their properties, and if they're keeping them up in some areas but not others.
Yeah, and I couldn't comment on that, although, what I would say is, based off of my experience, is that, there are so many foreclosed properties that banks traditionally, and I'll just say, in my opinion, are not taking care of the properties across the board. I mean, it would be fascinating to see, more of an in-depth study and look at that. But from my experience, it's just, I think the banks are, they're overwhelmed with the amount of foreclosure that they have, so much so that I've had somebody in the industry tell me, they're just as happy if you were the original homeowner and you can't pay rent, they're pretty happy just to have you staying there. The simple fact that the water's going, electricity's going, until they can figure out how to proceed forward, there's such a backlog of that. So.
I have a question for you. Do you charge them for any incident that you act on?
The banks?
Yeah. Because the city, you have to.
There's all sorts of good ideas I'm taking away from this.
Yeah, you should be charged for that. The other question I have, do you keep data of factors for age, sex, ethnicity, race, things like this, people that you cite for or trespass?
So do we keep data on that? Yeah, I don't think you specifically look at data mining that, but it's available because of the information's on any sheet. I mean, we are really trying to find ways for folks who are impacted with homelessness to not criminalize that. I mean, we are, Portland is looking at a lot of different avenues. I know that's been a hot topic lately, but I mean, I can tell you that our officers, when they come across someone that's homeless who's really down and out in their luck, and their whole reason for being there is that they're homeless. Unlike you would read in the newspapers, our officers are very human, and it matters to them. And so they try to go and find ways around it. And so yes, the data is probably available. It's not something we're tracking specifically that I'm aware of through our strategic services division or anything like that. But really, this whole issue is something that's come up in the last, I would say, year, where this is becoming more of an issue for us. And it's kind of like, okay, so now we have this issue we've kind of heard about, like what you say, the individual calls are coming in, and now it's like, okay, well, this is an East Precinct issue that we want to try to grasp on and find out how we can solve some solutions. So I have to be honest with you, this has been one of the most fascinating meetings I've been to for quite some time. And again, I've shared a lot of the same meetings, but this is very educational, so I appreciate your time in educating me.
Okay, so back here, and then
I just had a brief comment. This is an area where I think almost everyone in this room knows more than I do, but I was going to comment that I've been seeing news coverage of, I think primarily Detroit and Cleveland, taking some really proactive strategies to try to prevent foreclosed properties from becoming distressed, and trying to look at ways to keep either people who've been foreclosed on in that home as a renter, or to ensure that bank-owned properties are being rented and are also being maintained, because there have been issues nationally of banks renting out those properties but then neglecting some fairly basic issues because either they don't have the infrastructure or the inclination to be able to respond to them. But those might be two locations to look into the coverage of what they're doing and see if there's stuff that would work out here where you could make a connection with someone in those cities and find out how they've implemented it.
thank you. Would you
from Talia Jacobson.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just gonna put the foreclosure issue into context really briefly. The Housing Bureau, along with the state of Oregon, are the primary funders of all of the nonprofit organizations in the county that provide foreclosure prevention services. And the data that we got from them in February indicated that because a lot of the moratorium that had been placed on foreclosures, and also the litigation and process issues played out, has all played out, that those organizations that we work with had seen more foreclosures in February alone than they had seen in the previous 6 months. So that's just a scope of the issue. But I also wanted to say that my recollection is that a year ago, the Office of Neighborhood Involvement had a foreclosure registry ordinance for the council, and maybe it never made it that far, but there was a great ordinance and program crafted that required banks to register their foreclosed properties, and then it had a whole fine and fee schedule that would then go to support both, police involvement as well as the Bureau of Development Services Neighborhood Inspections team, who is also responsible for going out and citing the maintenance of those properties. And so it might be good to get a status update on what happened to that.
It's a mediation too that happens between the Arizona and the bank that helps them resolve those issues.
Use of mediation? Okay, good, great. Okay, I'm kind of doing a time check right now because we do want to shift gears pretty soon, like now, or just after now, to solutions, next steps. What can we do with this? How can we be action oriented? Is there anything about the issues that hasn't been covered yet that anybody thinks needs to be on the list of what's been on topic? Yeah.
Just a quick question. Are there any trends of crimes that are specifically more rampant in this part of town? Is it known for anything?
In East County?
Yeah.
I will tell you that East County is there has been changes in the types of crimes we've seen after over the last probably 5 years or so. It's changing, and so we kind of have everything out here. We have a lot of property crimes, we have a lot of person crimes. We've seen a pretty substantial increase in the amount of gang.
That's what I was going to say, the gangs is what
The gang issue, I'll leave it at that. There's been a lot more activity out this way, and I think you can look at some of the low-income housing that has moved out here, and the displacement has kind of factored. So East County kind of has everything out there. I mean, we're impacted by drugs, we're impacted by definitely the property crimes associated with that, and the standard violence that occurs, and then when you have a population of people, and then the gang issue. And so, East Precinct is kind of known, at least along the working with law enforcement officers, it is everything. There's not one thing that you have to specialize. You have to be able to understand and try to control all levels of the crime that happen, because it is touched by almost every piece of it that every other precinct has, but it's magnified here.
Well, and what I'd say is in the East Portland Action Plan equity paper, what they draw to attention is indeed the city of Portland puts more money into policing and fire out here. And we say, but when you correlate that they put less money into transportation, they put less money into parks, they put less money into other elements, where is that preventative tip? So that indeed, if you were putting more money in these other facets of creating a livable community, likely as not, you would be putting less money into the police. And so and you can see the exact numbers on that in this paper. But when you say, what are the solutions? And I just wanted to say, number one, East Portland Action Plan has 268 action items, and I promise I'm not going to read them all. But they do every year make a priority list of action items where they've agreed as a group that we will actively advocate for this. And the first one is set a goal that East Portland attain parity with other parts of the city in public facilities and capital spending. Encourage city bureaus to prioritize projects in East Portland. We have advocated and been successful in getting the geographic mapping that informed the paper I just spoke about. But in housing, they also asked for a citywide audit of resource allotment and research tax equity and contributions of East Portland to the tax base. But then, Jean, do you wanna speak to the housing specifics, or Frida, or do you want me to look that up? It's increased, opportunities for minority home ownership.
And
So
for middle income housing.
Exactly, if you're looking at those foreclosed houses, how can we perhaps work with the Housing Bureau and others to move people of color in our communities into ownership of those homes and the stability that that provides for education. Establish policy and practice that balances regional affordable housing supply and promotes fair share across Portland. Also, evaluate the location and intensity of current residential zoning as it reflects maintaining low-income housing stock and enhances middle-income housing development, and create a housing rehabilitation program to improve the safety and appearance of existing housing stock. The other thing the schools asked for, and we've worked with Bureau of Development Services to accomplish, is establish policies and practices to address timing, permit notification, and funding of services when development occurs, so that you're including schools in that information and so they can plan. But those are the priorities, as well as the new one that was cited before of asking for tax equity at the point of sale. So those are things that the East Portland Action Plan has advocated for as solutions around housing. Also, the support for the Gateway Education Economic Development Center as a means by which the school districts and the area can work to ready our people to get living wage jobs and support them in that process.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll, thank goodness we have this blue sheet, we'll add that to our, to our notes. So, mine was ready to take notes, thank you, so we can compile it and make sure that you guys see that we are summarizing all of this really well. You had your hand up, and we're talking about solutions?
Yeah, well, I wanted to respond to just
Yeah.
the home ownership piece. So the Housing Bureau released an RFP yesterday. It included $500,000 for first-time affordable home ownership in East Portland Gateway specifically.
Didn't you say, was there not an action item that you mentioned earlier about following up on that?
Bank-owned foreclosed property registry.
Yeah.
That came out of the
That would be good to know.
You might
So,
wanna
hold on 1 second, let's make sure we capture that, I was distracted. So, the content of that was that
There are $500,000 for first-time low-income affordable home ownership in Gateway.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in regard to foreclosure, what we're finding with a lot of our housing issues in our studies is you also have to look at what the laws are on the books at the state level. Because sometimes you're thinking, oh, we can have a solution, there's a law up there that causes some of these problems. So, just wherewithal to make sure there isn't something related to the foreclosures that are on the Oregon books.
So for identifying state laws affecting foreclosure issues. Okay, yeah.
I think we've talked about, both, making sure that the affordable housing is safe, decent housing for everybody to live in. So, we've talked about it in the E-plan, but rehabilitating housing that does not meet city standards for, acceptable housing. So upgrading the substandard housing, but then I would also add to build more affordable housing so that people who want to remain in East Portland or East Multnomah County have a place where they can do that and they're not forced out.
Intentionally affordable.
Right.
Intentionally affordable,
yes.
glad to hear that term. Yes. Somebody over here? Yes.
Oh, so I just had a question for those of us who are less familiar with the Human Rights Commission. Can someone give us a one-sentence description of how, your points of influence to help us think about how we?
We missed that
Answer this
piece in
question.
the presentation for this. Would somebody, Alan or?
We're a volunteer commission that's appointed by city council, so part of our charge is advising city council on areas around human rights and civil rights. And so we don't have enforcement powers, but as Linda mentioned, the efforts that we undertake are around discovery, so going out into communities and trying to understand what the issues are, advocating both mostly at the city level, but also like we talked about, we advocated at the statewide level for the Section 8 protected class visibility. So not only bringing forward the issues that we're involved in, but others that are being involved in the community and in education. So bringing forward issues that are important to the community.
So we would want, say, with housing if we end up moving forward with coalition and developing coalition in the metro area, that your group would be one we want in the loop on what we're doing.
We're one of many, especially around housing, so there are also some very powerful committees that work out of the Housing Bureau that are focused on affordable housing and on fair housing and housing issues overall. So we're one of the groups that do that, but the city's got other groups that also are involved in that too. Especially if you're gonna talk specifically about housing, but overall, those are the issues that we undertake. It's a pretty wide breadth of human rights and civil rights issues.
So does that answer your question? I think you were asking what's the mechanics by which we would take these solutions and make them actionable as much as we can?
Yeah, it was just kind of helping me think in what context we're providing solutions, so like, for the, yeah, that's helpful.
We hope to influence city policy specifically, and state policy through a human rights lens, I would add.
Yeah, so a concrete suggestion, and I think it's probably one of the 268, but just to piggyback on Jean's statement about the condition of market affordable housing is an adequately funded and staffed inspections program for rental housing.
Okay.
That is maybe client-driven, tenant-driven.
It's complaint-driven now, and so as the vacancy rate shrinks and people are not willing to rock the boat with their landlord to request repairs, they live in incredibly, potentially hazardous to their health, substandard housing, and so finding a way to inspect units that doesn't make the tenants vulnerable.
Great. So we have 10 more minutes to do this exercise as solutions.
And I would just incorporate the comment around the enterprise zones.
Yeah.
Again, you have the housing, but you need employment.
As enterprise zones as a strategy for creating that. What other solutions have been said that we haven't documented yet? My notebook is so full, I'm trying to. Sorry,
Addressing transportation and the culture of service at TriMet, encouraging a culture of service there, making them aware of the impact of their decisions on people's lives and whether they can get to work or not.
Yeah.
We know that this area of East Portland has 23% of its population in poverty compared to 17% for overall in Multnomah County. It's the highest area in Multnomah County for percentage of poverty. And I want to go back on the suggestions to what Frida said, is that we have to find ways to get people who are currently living here to be able to increase their incomes. That we don't want people to leave, but they have to have more income to either pay the rent or be able to get into home ownership if that's what they want to do. So I think we have to both bring businesses here so that people can be employed in East Portland and find ways to increase people's job skills so that they can get employment and they have more income to pay for housing.
Yes.
Bringing banks through business associations, Rotary, bankers go to those things, bringing them into the conversation about solutions about home ownership, keeping people in their homes, and taking care of housing stock. As you mentioned, they seem to be perpetually absent from our conversation.
And the point that you made that there might be resources available.
Yeah, because a lot of the big banks, they have community, they usually have a community section within those banks. And how do you bring them into conversation so they can spread that back out to their top CEOs?
Nice. Anybody back there? I thought I saw a hand up. Okay.
Oh, just one of the things, and this is very East Portland, and it has to do with your time, is the zoning has to be really looked at, because a lot of it is residential, so you can't even bring in jobs because it isn't zoned. You put a job there, number one, but also design review to work on making sure future housing isn't substandard, that it meets a level. There's design review and gateway, but not the rest of East Portland. And so that's why we end up with these properties built in within 10 years, they look bad, because they don't have those standards.
Well, and they don't have sidewalks because the city has given them remonstrance and said to the developer, you don't have to build a sidewalk because it won't be a full block, so we won't build a sidewalk. and
Yeah,
then you
they-
get no
they-
sidewalks and
they
you
get
can't do
waved
anything.
away, you know, and not quite as bad right now, I noticed they're making you put in sidewalks, but those things will help them in with the housing. Okay, yes.
You know, as I listen, there's so many arms attached to this subject, and it's easy to get lost with it. Somewhere in the solutions, I think there needs to be some overarching lens that brings it together in some form of unified, solidity, such that you don't approach each of these different entities that relates to this, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be transit, busing, or economic, such that they are viewed in some siloed mindset or approach, but that where they intersect, because they definitely intersect and come together. I mean, when you say that folks are homeless and squatting, I mean, they're not getting their children to school, well, what do you think is happening to our child welfare hotline? You know, with those families. So how do we bring in key players from each of those respective entities so that you can have all voices there, having some dialogue and discussion at the same time as opposed to each dealing with it separately and individually, because they all intersect, they all relate. And if you're gonna have healthy communities, healthy families, you've gotta have those voices talking to one another in concert in a cooperative fashion, as opposed to protecting their own individual dollars and looking at their own separate budgets and their own limited resources, etc. So something around working in a cohesive fashion that avoids this being approached from silo.
I call that whole systems approach.
And you actually will find synergies that actually save money. That's why the district has worked so well with the nonprofits. We even are bringing in the churches, because we can do more with.
But I would encourage, the East Portland Action Plan has a technical advisory committee of representatives from different bureaus, different divisions, different entities. Housing Authority of Portland, Metro, City of Portland Housing, TriMet. They're all sitting at the same table every quarter to talk about, and I can say, unfortunately, DHS has to be local, so it would be great to have that presence.
Okay,
added.
continuing really quickly on just solutions as our summary, Ashley?
I have a question, maybe this is not the time, but it sounds like there are a lot of folks who've been very involved in this, and I would be interested to hear what has been effective, because there is a very long list of solutions already developed, and we're adding to that here, but, you know, what has really worked, what hasn't, and why, and if we can be helpful with that, so that we're not duplicating efforts or not learning from each other in that way. And so maybe that's another conversation, another time that we can follow up.
Yeah,
just really
absolutely,
like to hear that.
that's a great thought. Yeah.
I wanted to actually follow up on that. The East Portland Action Plan, the Housing Subcommittee, this is an issue that the Housing Subcommittee is working on. I mean, we're only working on 2 issues, and this is one of them. And the tax inequity is the other one. So if people are interested in working on this issue more, I would encourage them to come to the Housing Subcommittee. Where we are is that we're looking for what solutions have worked. And so Laura has gone through and looked at research in other cities. And we're meeting on Monday. We always meet the second Monday at 6 o'clock, and people should just come. And what we're gonna do is look at various solutions that other cities across the country have looked at and see if we can find any of those that might work for Portland, and then advocate for them.
And
So
that
would be
committee,
one avenue.
where they meet, when they meet, is on this sheet of paper.
Okay, so I have 4 things we might wanna add. Detroit as a model. What was that for?
Don't go quite that far.
Detroit and Cleveland.
Let's not do the collapse of the city government.
Detroit and Cleveland are both trying to be very proactive about dealing with abandoned housing stock and
yeah.
finding ways to keep people in place.
The fine and fee schedule that you were mentioning, and the toolkit, the overall gentrification prevention toolkit.
Well, displacement prevention.
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually want the term gentrification, prosperity, we want
want it out here.
Yeah.
We just don't wanna displace people as it's coming in. And as you see with the new park, and there's the infrastructure with transportation happening, it probably might happen faster here than it happened in the inner city, because we've advocated for so much.
Yes.
And is there anything that, anyone from the mayor's office or Commissioner Salzman or Novick's office may wanna add? Cause there might be stuff that we're unaware of.
Wow, that's what I was about to do. Alan came and whispered that suggestion into my ear. I wonder if we let this
Or OHR.
OHR, sure. You wanna say your comment, and then we'll move to, commissioner and mayor's reps' comments, if they have them?
Sure, I was just gonna give a thought on attacking the transportation piece of anti-displacement, especially since I know that there's been a tremendous amount of work done in East Portland to try to identify needs and identify priorities, and the momentum's really building. One thing that I see on transportation planning processes that happens is we will be doing a transportation plan and every neighborhood will show up and say, look, we have our list of 60 needs. And as transportation professionals, a lot of times our hearts sink in that moment because we think, wow, we've got 4 neighborhoods, everybody's got their list of 60 needs, we've got the funding for 8 projects. So one piece of tactical advice I would give is that as you come up with your lists of needs, which are incredibly great tools, we love it when people can already say this is what we care about, dig in and come up with, okay, if these are the 60 things we want, what if we could only get 20 of these things, which 20? What if we could only get 1, which 1? What if we could only get funding for things under $5 million, which things would be our top list then? And doing that little bit of extra work when you come up with what your needs are, to give you different ways to slice it, I think can make you very much better able to be competitive in getting the city's ear and getting the state's ear and saying, do this one thing for us. If you can't do everything, do this one thing.
And that's what the East Portland Action Plan yearly strategy is.
Great.
Out of 268 items, they've picked 24, and they're in different categories, so maybe 2 to 3, some in housing, some in transportation, and they interface. Somebody was talking earlier about the need to have that interface. They work together, they come together in a meeting. We have 14 subcommittees, they come together once a month with about 67 people who interface with what are you doing and how is it affecting what I'm doing.
Thank you so much. So let's give city commissioner representatives a chance and the mayor's office a chance to comment if they have something to contribute. We need to put you on the spot.
That's fine. I appreciate you coming out. It's fun. So again, my name's Andrea and I'm from Commissioner Novick's office. So we have the Bureau of Transportation, Emergency Management and Communications, Emergency Communications. So first, I'm ultimately here to listen, and I really appreciated everyone's input in looking at the issue of displacement as something of a holistic solution that's needed, and I definitely see that conversation happening in our office. I know Commissioner Novick has been talking with state legislatures about inclusionary zoning, just what specifically is happening with inclusionary zoning, why certain restrictions are the way they are, with the understanding, right, that that's not the whole solution to East Portland, but, you know, a tool that we want to be learning more about, and that he is proactively learning more about. I think that's all that I have. I know I've gotten to know a few more folks from the Human Rights Commission, so I really appreciate your time and meeting with me and getting me up to speed on your work here, and I would definitely encourage you all to keep talking with me. In Commissioner Novick's office as East Portland Liaison, even though we don't have the Housing Bureau directly under our office, my role is to communicate with the mayor's office and with the other commissioners on East Portland priorities, and this is definitely a priority that I've heard time and time and again since I've started, and so we want to make sure that I'm able to bring that into the building as often as possible. Thanks.
I'd like to, and I'm sorry, I have a sore throat, so I can't speak very loudly. I wanted to touch on one of the earlier observations about the increase in homelessness, particularly on the Springwater Trail. And we've been hearing that from our office as well. I think certainly the focus has been on downtown Central City, but we've been hearing more and more from not just East Portland, but really citywide. So we've been able to, in response, do an initiative that's underway right now, which is a collaborative with one of our street outreach agencies called Join, working with officers at Central Precinct and at East Precinct to identify those who are chronically homeless or just really vulnerable on the street, try to get them into housing. So we only just started. We had a really nice meet and greet at East Precinct, and you kind of saw like the meeting of the minds of, you know, this officer saying, "Oh, so-and-so's been out forever," and the outreach worker said, "Yes, let's, you know, now we have this one-time money to try to find housing for this person." So that's underway. That's being done at Central City downtown and also out at East Precinct. So we're hoping for some really good results, you know, something to prove that this kind of collaboration can work. And we're seeing monthly results coming in, but there will be a fuller, more comprehensive report in April. So hopefully we'll have some really good news to share with the whole community at that point.
This is a question for the mayor's office and the city council members. Is there any partnership in this area that we have discussed between the city of Portland, Multnomah County, and city of Gresham?
Yeah, I know, just in my limited time there in the mayor's office this last month, that, yeah, he has regular meetings with Multnomah County commissioners and Chair Madrigal, and as well with the city officials over at Beaverton. So there definitely is some, you know, talks happening. I see where my role is to bring topics to him to speak to those different just areas, different bureaus, different city of, you know, commissioners. So right now for my role, what I see is that I know that Mayor Ailes is committed to East Portland. He's definitely gone and committed financing for PPAC to go $300,000 more for the next year. So he's definitely committed in seeing that book. What I would like to bring are these solutions back, these different areas, these different ideas, and I know he's committed into hearing them, and what I think everybody needs is just really creative solutions on how to get those done, which I'm here to help.
I can answer your question a little bit, at least in one area. You know, we know very well that crime and poverty don't know, excuse me, jurisdictional boundaries. And we've been working for a long time around what's going on in Rockwood, what's going on in Rosewood. Been working with Sarah in Westbrook and the Gresham PD, where we fund the Gresham police officer position, and we fund 2 positions in Portland PD. But there's a new initiative coming out called Renew. The steering committee's just recently been formed. It stands for, I can't remember, Rosewood, Energizing
we have a lot of acronyms.
Neighborhoods.
It's a good thing, let's call it.
But it's all about working around crime and poverty issues. So East Portland Precinct is on that, Gresham is on that, Multnomah County Sheriffs are on that, Community Justice, we're on it, and some other people. So it's the really first effort I've seen in many years to take a jurisdictional approach to some of these issues. And so we're really excited about that. It's just getting started. They haven't even had a press release yet or anything.
You got more stuff than I do.
I still regret my battery dying right when you had your. So, do you want to just tell me? And I don't have to record. I just want to keep the audio, and it'll maybe be a black spot. But just I don't want that to be missing.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just summarize? And I'll keep it recording just so I can.
Okay. So what I was saying is that we are working today on these tasks, and we're coming with these next steps. I would like also the city council members, when the representative here, take back to them what we are working on and see if they are already worked on some of them to communicate it to us, or if they are in the process of working some of them to communicate it to us, So that way we are not making some suggestions or requests in the future on things that they already are doing, and also to know what's their steps and what's the actions they're going to take on these areas. Thank you.
Final thoughts, and we're gonna have to switch gears to our HRC business meeting, which you guys are welcome to stay for, but we will not feel poorly of you if you don't.
Jeff, did you have something you wanted to bring in from the office?
Oh,
Sure.
sorry.
Okay.
That would be great. I think it's important that the Office of Equity and Human Rights would be very interested in just reminding the Human Rights Commission, which works independently under our office, to remember your other partners who are working on these issues and to partner with them as much as you can, as is evident here. But and to see what, and to understand what kind of work is already going on in these areas, and respect that, and see how you can be a part of that as well, and not try to reinvent the wheel all over again. I think it's also important that we understand what the Human Rights Commission can do with these recommendations and these solutions. One of the things I think is pretty vital from this meeting here, just so we don't have this wonderful meeting and this great conversation and then it's all gone, is that if you haven't signed in, please sign in. If you're interested in hearing more about what's happening with this work or being a part of it or volunteering, please make sure you sign in on the clipboard right there by the door, and let us know your email, and certainly we'll be able to follow up with you and let you know what kinds of things are happening and future meetings that are focused on this this topic. So.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you so much, everyone, that all the folks from out here in East Portland for coming and giving us the opportunity to talk with you, and for the folks who came out to East Portland to visit this different land. Thank you for listening and hopefully understanding that there are some unique issues and opportunities out here, and that's what we want everybody to hear tonight. So hopefully we got some of that. You are welcome both to stay and hear our business and to have some food. It's a little cooler now than it was, but it's still as tasty. So if you don't, then Jeff will have to eat it all later. So please have some.
And I just want to share something super quick, like 1 minute.
So we'll nominate.
No, I'll wait.
Oh,
Okay.
the voting thing. Anything that requires a vote, we should do first. I would prioritize voting.
Does everyone have a copy of the minutes? Should be in your packet that you received when you came in.
There's 8 of us, so is that not?
Yes.
It is.
8's a
Well,
quorum.
it's Joe time on, right? It's just, it's like.
I did that one time in an email, I was like, I counted Jeff.
All right. So the minutes from the meeting of February 5th are in your packet. Take a second look at that. Unless there have any substantive changes to said minutes.
Amy had sent me hers, and I incorporated those.
They have been already incorporated?
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Any other changes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the February 5th meeting?
I move.
Is there a second? Linda will second. All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes of February 5th, would say please, with an aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Dula and Malloy have abstained, as has Ashley.
Ashley abstained also?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
What do you feel about closing the door? I'm easily distracted. But, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, our next item of business?
Okay, our next item of business is
Voting wise?
voting wise. Just let me flip back to mine.
Yeah. I don't have any. There's one more, let's vote on Damon's request. That's the only other voting thing I think Linda.
There's only one voting thing, right?
No, the other one is the request.
There is another one from Linda.
Oh, from Linda. Yes,
Housing.
all right.
Oh, yeah.
So there's 2 more things.
People without housing.
Which would you like to do first?
Just start with one of them.
Or shall I do the DOJ report first, just get that?
Well, my recommendation was to prioritize voting.
Voting,
Oh, sorry.
in case we lose the room.
Not here.
Right.
Okay, so I'll just go. So as many of you know, and some of you at work or may not have been fully briefed on it, but the Community Police Relations Committee, in partnership with PPD, a training that was designed in 2012 to address some issues, actually some related to what we're dealing with today, demographic shifts, race, police practices in terms of hiring. And so it was in the command staff, so lieutenants all the way up to chief went through this training in December 2012, and sergeants went through it last November. And so we, as a part of that broader initiative, the concept came up of creating an equity and diversity program manager within the Bureau to be fully connected to both the advisory councils out in the community, like the Slavic Advisory Council, African American Advisory Council, Sexual Minorities Roundtable, and other constituent groups, as well as to be able to implement certain equity lens toolkits within the Bureau. So to be able to have a point person that helps deal with this stuff. So we're just the CPRC and requesting for different community partners to write a letter to send to the mayor and to all the commissioners, CC the chief, in support of this position. And so as you know, with budget issues, there's always fighting, and the budget is coming up now, so it would be an add to the existing budget. And it's been quite a haul to get to this point, in order to say that. So that will be the vote on to be able to send, on behalf of HRC, a letter to the mayor, commissioners, and the chief. And just so you know, the CPRC is also doing a separate letter as well.
And they've already voted. We've already voted
to do it.
So the letter's in your packet.
Yeah.
It's a letter that's addressed to the mayor and the commissioner.
So, I have a question. If I put a question by the community, a lot of people saying, you're supposing this letter, where does it fall in the human rights part? Supposing somebody to be having a job with police and a job with the police bureau. So where does it fall in the human rights commission?
Well, they would manage, partly manage the work of the CPRC on this initiative, on this equity initiative, because a lot of this stuff would never happen if it was not for the CPRC, and the previous committee that I think were, the racial, what was that committee? Racial profiling committee, that was the precursor to the CPRC. So, if I'm not mistaken, that might fall under human rights.
I'm sorry, did you say that position would manage the CPRC's work that they've done on equity?
The training.
The training piece.
Yes.
They would continue that work. They would continue the implementation in the Bureau of the training, especially for the line officers and non-sworn staff. That's the next big piece over the next year. So one of the responsibilities for this position will be to implement that training at that level. So it's a continuation of the work of CPRC.
Without this position, where does that responsibility lie?
Pretty much, it used to solely lie with the committee or volunteers, as well as the subcommittee chair, and it was portioned out to Emma Blvd, who helped present last year with us, but she has been primarily co-opted by the training division, so they basically said you can't do that work anymore.
So, but basically, this is not an Office of Equity and Human Rights part, no. It's not part of CPRC, no. It's not part of Human Rights Department, no. I mean, Human Rights Department, I mean, not part of us. This is, we're looking at Portland Police Bureau creating position within their bureau to start addressing equity or things like that.
Right.
But it's not, so it's not that is related to me as a Human Rights Commissioner saying this is false and our human rights because they are going to be given certain time or certain things to the improving the policies, procedures of the Portland Police Bureau regarding like sidewalks to not be involved too much with things like that. You understand me? So
Right.
I'm trying to relate it to us so later on we're not regretting we vote something that this position has nothing to do with human rights.
Well, it will be a partner, though. Ideally, we want this position to be a partner with the HRC and CPRC and OEHR on any of these kinds of efforts related to
The way I look at it is, we have already, over the time, partnered to create this training protocol and program. And this position would be the one that sees that program gets implemented and that there's follow-through to make sure that.
And we partially own it. I'll go as far as to say that, we put money on it. So not only are we partnered, we're a partial owner of that.
So in terms of how it relates to us, I mean, we made the decision this relates to us when we decided to participate in the development of the program. And this is just saying we want to see it, we want to see the next evolution of it go forward.
Especially, and so this role is both internal, dealing with internal processes, but also connecting with constituents, people in the community.
So, okay, just here is where I'm going. I'm going with one, I know we helped and supported the training.
Right.
That's part of it. I heard that this is a fruit of that action we took, which is good. Where I'm going as well is how the Bureau is going to have a commitment that this position will be independent, that they will be overseen, not influenced, that they will be overseeing things that deals with equity and things that deal with human rights. And this will be benefiting from, this position will be benefiting from it as well as this person will be liaison with us, if we vote as human rights. So this is where I'm going. Because the Bureau has been, and the end has been doing a great job by her voice and things like that. I don't want this position to be like serving a ledger of somebody's agenda or, so that's where I'm going. So it has to be from idea, from the beginning, birth of the idea, what we did and what happened and the fruit that's come out of it, and the conclusion at the end, it should be this way. So it's a continuum of things.
Well, we'll add that 4 bureaus are requesting new equity positions this year. One is BPS, for example, and I can't remember what the other 2 are.
Parks.
Parks, okay. Okay, so this is.
Parks and EES.
Yeah. Okay. But I don't want to spend too much more time on it.
I did hear from a community member today that she thought that our communities are not supporting this at this time, that they haven't been consulted. So,
Did I hear that CPRC was reaching out to communities for their support for this, such as CIO and AMAC?
Right, quite a few, mental health, disabilities oriented, CRC, the Urban League has already sent a letter of support. So the HRC, we're actually asking our parent group for support.
Right,
Yeah,
and so what was the response from CIO and AMAC?
We haven't heard back from CIO yet. Noble has, which is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, they sent their letter. Urban League has, Coalition of Communities of Color is pending. Have not heard back from AMA. Is that who you?
AMAC, yeah, AMA, coalition.
Okay. Okay. So we've had, so to those that we've reached out to, we've had majority letters of support, but probably at least one that we might not get.
So, does this come to us as a motion from the CPRC?
How does that work? I don't know.
You say it does.
I think it
Okay.
does, yeah.
Yes.
You
Yes.
don't need a second.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's some, couple of things I've been trying to work out, and one thing I mentioned to you over email, and that was specifically the DOJ piece, the DOJ linked piece. So as I've been in the community and listening to a number of things, you know, we all know that there's a pretty significant environment of mistrust around intentions from Reese right now, and specifically addressing the DOJ agreement. There's concern that
special projects and other initiatives that Reese is introducing are an effort to demonstrate that they're addressing that agreement. And there's also concern that that demonstration is a way to weaken the Department of Justice's arguments that action needs to be taken in case that agreement goes to court. Right? So I'm just trying to summarize the environment that I'm recognizing. And so that's why I was alerted to the COCO connection and why I wanted some clarity on it. From what I understand of the agreement, I personally feel that for there to be a connection between the COCO and the Portland Police Bureau position would be in conflict of interest in the agreement being an independent oversight body. So I probably wouldn't be able to vote yes on that if that was included in the job description. And it also, I think it points to the larger concern about why is this happening now? And I think to be responsible as commissioners, we would need to respond to that as a whole.
The job is separate and has nothing to do with the COCO or the DOJ agreement, and this is something that came out of the CPRC a year before the agreement. And the reason it's happening now is because it's budget season, and because we want to keep momentum and make sure this is happening. This is not a part of the DOJ agreement whatsoever. Or
Should be over and above.
It is completely separate from. Yes. This was this whole initiative came out of CPRC.
I think we need to move on.
So can we
move the discussion and we should go?
We have a motion on the table from CPRC asking us to support this letter to the mayor and other.
Send the letter.
To send the letter, yeah. To be signed by the commission or by Sonji, there are several now, it's signed by them. So that's the motion. It would go as you see it here.
I mean, and it does include language about the COCO.
Well, it just
This
says, to be clear, this position is not part of the DOJ agreement.
But then tell me what it says about the COCO.
Oh, it's a, we believe that the equity and diversity could partner in conjunction with the COCO that is part of the DOJ agreement, specifically in the line goals of addressing outreach efforts to the civilian community.
And that's it.
But in conjunction is not clear to me if it's not part of the DOJ agreement that they would work in conjunction.
That really only means, like, say, we had a community meeting today, and we had a lot of different stakeholders. Say the COCO is having a community meeting that's outreach, and they're supposed to focus on mental health community. What if there's another person that also is reaching out to communities of color, and there's some shared interest there? That's what that means, like underserved community, and how, because people of color are included in the COCO, unless they have mental health issues. That's not part of that. So this is focused on those broadly traditional groups that always have had conflict or challenges with law enforcement.
Is this letter, I know Alan said that this is the letter that would go out. I mean, can it be edited before it goes out?
Yes.
Would it be possible to take that line out after?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that one.
Yes, definitely. Whatever we
Yeah,
need to.
I think they're just,
Whatever we need to strike. Yeah.
I'd strike that one
Leave the
sentence.
first sentence, and then I would say this initiative began by the CPRC and KPB. This initiative by the CPRC and KPB began prior to the agreement.
Okay.
And
just so you know, that was placed in there to the line that you're challenged with, because a lot of people assume that this had to do with the agreement. And so it was placed in there to emphasize that it's distinct from, but I can understand what you're saying. So yes, definitely.
And we don't need to make that distinction. This is a letter to.
Yeah, we'll definitely strike that one.
So I'll offer that as an amendment to the motion.
Okay.
That language was stricken.
Okay. So
So,
How do we vote?
all in favor, we have the motion, and it'll be this letter with, decided, formatted the way it is with all of our signatures, with this amendment that Malloy made to strike the one sentence, or revise it there, take out the Coble reference, essentially. So all in favor by show of hands and an aye? Aye. Oh, what do you say? Any opposed? And any abstentions? Did somebody capture me?
Oh, I thought that happened today.
Yeah, no, anyway, she didn't get sworn in.
So she's not a member, did she get sworn in? Even though-
The mayor's office pushed it to today, it was supposed to be last week.
So let's go to our second vote, because I think we're gonna get quickly up.
Okay, that's
Oh, can I interject quickly? The gentleman in the halls just told me you do not have to move everything back, he'll do that for you.
Oh,
Oh,
He is a gentleman.
fantastic. Officer and a gentleman.
whoa.
Well, then take your time, folks.
I sent this out electronically, and this is a hard copy of a sample HRC op-ed draft, created and written by RAP in San Francisco, which is a housing advocacy group. We remember the people that came to us and gave us that wonderful comprehensive report on the causes of houselessness. And this HRC, Paul Bowden of RAP, is getting an okay on this from other HRCs on the West Coast. So, Seattle and Eugene have signed it, and this is about the decriminalizing homelessness. CDC and HRTF have been working on People Without Housing Solutions Forum that will take place in May. And then this is part of that action to move the dial in Portland about criminalization of homelessness and to stand up and have people in Portland, give them an opportunity and a lens through which to view people without housing that is more humane and just than some of the things we've been reading in the paper.
Sorry if I missed this, where do we want this to be printed, with which publication?
Amy, where will this be printed and sent on? Do we realize?
I don't know.
So the ask is for HRC to sign this, and then the distribution, effort will be undertaken by RAP.
Okay.
So RAP is asking HRCs along the West Coast to sign this, and then the assumption is they would send it out kind of in mass to media along the West Coast all at the same time. They're going to have an organized campaign around this op-ed overall.
So usually there's a word count limit for op-eds, and this exceeds that by most standards. So I was just curious if we have opportunity to edit it, or if that will be handled by another, I don't know.
I would call it an opinion piece, I suppose.
Right.
Okay.
The motion from HRTF, or NCDC, is that HRC give our signature and approval to RAP to proceed with distributing this op-ed in conjunction with the other human rights commissions that will sign on from the West Coast, include hopefully being Washington, Seattle, San Francisco, Eugene, and those kinds of things.
And CDC is approved this.
Washington at the State Human Rights Commission, by the way.
Well, they did.
I second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor with the show of hands and an aye?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions?
Are you all? You are yes, no,
I
and
voted
assistant?
aye.
Okay, great. So that is the voting pieces, right, Linda?
That's it.
How about announcements and updates? Malloy, you're starting with the committee.
Hopefully all of you saw the interest form has gone out to fill the vacancy created by Donita's resignation. Yeah, this one. I miss her too. They're due on the 17th. I strongly encourage people to get this out to all your networks. We want to try and do as best we can, to make sure that we're recruiting from the communities that we want represented and want to hear from. So applications are due the 17th. We will, the nominating committee will review the applications, and our plan is to do interviews the following week, right? So we'll have sifted through all the applications and contacted people for interviews by the end of the week that the applications are due.
You might need to be a little mindful that that week of the 24th is also the week of the Governing for Racial Equity Conference. So schedule-wise, let's just be, for all HRC activities, the entire office is going to be involved in putting on that conference. So we just need to be mindful.
So that means OEHR will be free.
It's like a desert in there.
What, the office or?
Space.
Oh,
You
yeah.
shouldn't have any trouble getting meeting space from here.
If you get like you just have to know how to set it up. By the way, Oregon Nikkei Endowment and MRG Foundation are both spreading the word about the opening.
Thank you.
So maybe we need to take a look at it.
Are you looking at any of the people that you liked from the previous round?
We discussed them, and I think we're reaching out to remind, or to let them know there's another vacancy and see if they were interested in being considered for it.
And we've received 2 applications since the last round of interviews, so we're putting that in the pool too.
I visited R2D2 today, until being community for the 21st, and I'm going to write up my visit and send it out to all of you. Thank you.
Some more announcements? Oh, DOJ.
Okay, there's a lot going on with that, and I had to take notes, and I will be as quick as I can. I think this will just provide an overview of what happened, and then if there's questions in between April, please come talk to us, and then anything else that needs to be addressed as a commission, we can talk about then. April meeting. So, for February's meeting, Amy and Sonji introduced an action to testify in front of the DOJ fairness hearing. Linda was going to do oral testimony, Emmanuel was going to do oral testimony, Kate was brought in as an advisor at that point, because she wasn't commissioner yet, and we got PCOT involved as well to bring their testimony in as a joint statement. And so in the process, we heard from Jeff about concerns from the city attorney with our testimony. And the message we heard was that two things. That the judge can only reject or accept the agreement after that hearing. He cannot rule to request any changes or to demand any changes to that agreement.
That's not entirely true.
Well, that's what we were understanding at the time. The second piece, a message that we got at that time was that that the city attorney was concerned that if as a city body, HRC was testifying in a way that encourages a rejection, or which would include asking for amendments to that agreement, that would be in conflict with the city as a party to the case, right? So at that point, we had a conference call. We brought in Jeff and Malloy and Alan, and at that point, we decided to not testify for 2 main reasons that I'm seeing at this point. One, we had not decided as a commission whether or not we could give a heads up or a heads down clearly to the agreement. And if the judge wanted to ask us, we had not come to the commission as a vote. Some of us thought, some of them thought that would have been important to determine as a commission. Oh, sorry, that was just the one thing I'm noting as the main interest in halting that testimony. And so after the hearing, the judge did offer the option for parties to respond to 13 questions. So instead of just that option yes or option no, he found a gray area.
Quite a few of them.
Right, 13 of them.
Well, I'm sorry, Amy, can I just clarify? After the oral testimony was taken, the judge left open the record to receive written testimony.
As well.
And it was after the close of that the judge submitted the 13 questions.
Yes, right. But we knew that the 13 questions were going to be available before the end of the week.
We knew the questions were coming.
We knew questions were coming.
So when we heard that questions were coming, that we had more of an opportunity that didn't conflict to this degree that was apparent before, Malloy tapped in and said, I recommend that we look into testifying, restarting this process. Sonji had fallen and was ill, so that endorser became Linda. Malloy and I met with Ellen Osanach of the attorney's office Wednesday at noon, and she clarifies there are no legal restrictions of you testifying, even as a city body. She did express her concerns about what might happen if the agreement is rejected, and we decided to send the testimony with specific language. We don't have that here today, I'm sorry.
We received it electronically.
Yeah, you guys received it electronically, and my final comment about that is the language specified, in addition to our suggestions for changes to that agreement, specified that HRC is an independent voice, so the judge wouldn't have confusion about our role as a city body, and two, that we were specifically asking the judge not to interpret our request for changes as a request for rejection. Whew. So, you guys might have different opinions of what happened, but that's that's the best that I could do.
We're still
at this time.
We're still negotiating with the DOJ. It's really kind of lawyers against lawyers, and most of what we're doing right now is confidential, so I can't share it. But it's an interesting process, fascinating, and it's moving forward. One thing that I could say with no hesitation is that the city and the DOJ has gotten a very loud and consistent message from our community that there is mistrust of the police bureau.
Right now.
And we, you mean the AMA coalition?
When you say
we are negotiating with you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm part of the.
Yeah.
I'll line it
AMA is a party to, as a friend of the court.
On that note, I'd like to reference folks to a recent Oregon article a couple of days ago. Assistant Chief Larry O'Day actually stated that, and they acknowledged that we need to change our mission. They actually said that.
It's a good article if you haven't read it, actually, about where the PPP is headed. So, and I spent some time talking to him the other day.
Could somebody send that to us electronically?
Sure.
You're in charge. You're looking at me like.
And I'd like to say that Amy did the lion's share of work and shepherding this through, and it's because of her timely work and her quick thinking that we were able to make an official testimony. Many of us wrote personal testimonies about things, issues that we have with the police, but thanks to Amy and Malloy and quick thinkers, we were able to testify. So there are rumors out there in the community that we did not do that, but actually we did. We did send our testimony in. The judge read it, and it had quite a bearing. It looks like it might have had some bearing on the questions that he came up with. Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I appreciate people, and particularly Malloy, with his eye of this is something that we could try again. You know, I had shifted gears and was focusing on my personal testimony and didn't feel like it was something I would be responsible for me to push unless there was somebody else coming in behind.
I would just add one last comment in general about judges and their decisions and all of that, and the influence that things like this have is, you know, a judge will never make a decision where they say, because of this group's, you know, submission, I am writing X, Y, Z. What you see is the language that was used in your submission is reflected in the decision. So if the questions reflect things we raised, then you're absolutely right, and we should feel, you know.
The things we raised, but to some degree, were mimicked by others. There were some that were not. So I think it'll be hard to decipher, but it'll be interesting to see.
I'm just saying, if you read the 13 questions and you're like, that's what we were talking about, you're probably right. That's where you got it.
I know. And with that, other announcements?
How many people are going to the governance
Total of 6, I believe.
Anybody here?
Manuel?
I haven't double checked, but I do believe next Tuesday is race talks, and the topic is going to be the flip side of what we talked about today. It's going to focus on that gentrification in north and northeast, and I'm going to try very hard to be there.
The former
Former Commissioner Donna Maxey would appreciate. She would appreciate that every month.
Yes, did you take your place? Or no?
Thank you, Alan. This was
Thank you
very
all.